The squad moved quickly after that, because the Nest Queen's death had sent some kind of signal through the chamber, and the dormant warriors were starting to stir in their cocoons, and nobody wanted to be there when they woke up fully and Captain Voss was shouting orders about where to place the explosives and how much time they had before everything went wrong. Taewon helped plant the charges even though his hands were still shaking from nearly dying, and Hana worked beside him. And she did not say anything, but she kept looking at him like she was checking to make sure he was real, and he understood that, because he kept doing the same thing and the fact that he was alive seemed impossible when he thought about how close the Nest Queen had been. Unit 7 stood guard while they worked, and its sensors swept the chamber constantly, and twice it fired at warriors that broke free from their cocoons early, and both times the shots were perfect and the threats ended before they could become real problems, and Taewon noticed that the drone had positioned itself between the squad and the most likely danger points like it was a shield instead of a weapon. They finished planting the explosives in 12 minutes, which was 3 minutes faster than the plan called for, and Captain Voss activated the timer and said they had 10 minutes to get clear before the entire facility came down, and everyone started moving back toward the ramp. But Taewon saw that one of the charges had a red light instead of green, and he knew that meant it was not armed properly, and if even one charge failed, the whole demolition might not work. He ran to the charge and tried to reset it, but his hands were clumsy with fear and exhaustion, and the light stayed red, and behind him, he could hear Hana yelling for him to leave it, and that they had to go now, but he kept working because this mission had cost too much to fail because of a bad connection, and he finally got the panel open and saw that one of the wires had come loose. The wire was easy to fix, but his hands were shaking so badly that he dropped it twice, and he could hear the dormant warriors making more noise now, and some of them were definitely waking up, and he forced himself to focus and got the wire connected. And the light turned green, and he felt a rush of relief so strong it made him dizzy. He turned to run back to the squad, but 3 warriors had broken free and were between him and the ramp, and they looked at him with eyes that were too many and all hungry. And he raised his rifle but knew he would not be fast enough because they were already moving and he was too tired and too slow. And Unit 7 appeared beside him so suddenly that he jumped, and the drone fired 3 times and 3 warriors fell and more were coming, and the drone put one metal hand on Taewon's shoulder and pushed him toward the ramp and said in that metal voice, to run and not stop, and Taewon ran while behind him Unit 7 held the position and killed everything that tried to follow. The squad was waiting at the top of the ramp, and Hana grabbed him and pulled him up the last few meters. And Captain Voss was counting down the time and saying they had 4 minutes left, and where was the drone? And Taewon looked back and saw Unit 7 still at the bottom of the ramp fighting against a growing number of warriors that had figured out something was wrong. He shouted for the drone to come, and Unit 7 fired twice more and then turned and started climbing the ramp. But the warriors were right behind it, and one of them got close enough to strike, and its claws scraped against the drone's armor and left. Deep marks and more were coming, and Taewon realized that Unit 7 might not make it out. The squad opened fire down the ramp, and their shots were not as precise as Unit 7's, but they did not need to be, because there were so many targets that missing was almost impossible, and the warriors fell, but more kept coming, and Unit 7 was halfway up the ramp when something huge burst out of the floor behind it, and Taewon recognized it as a devourer broodlord, which was like a warrior but 3 times bigger and 10 times meaner. The broodlord caught Unit 7 with one massive limb and threw the drone against the wall hard enough that Taewon heard something crack, and Unit 7 fell, and the broodlord moved in to finish it. But the drone rolled and came up firing, and the shot took the broodlord in its brain cluster. But the creature did not die immediately, and it thrashed and struck Unit 7 again, and this time the drone did not get up right away. Taewon did not think about what he did next because thinking would have stopped him. And he ran back down the ramp while Hana screamed his name, and he reached Unit 7 and grabbed the drone's arm and pulled, and the machine was incredibly heavy. But desperation gave him strength he did not know he had, and Unit 7's processors must have rebooted, because it suddenly moved and stood, and together they climbed the ramp, while the squad provided covering fire. They reached the top with 90 seconds left on the timer, and Captain Voss said that was enough talking, and they needed to move now, and the squad ran through the tunnels, and behind them, they could hear the sounds of thousands of warriors waking up, and the noise was like thunder mixed with screaming, and Taewon focused on putting one foot in front of the other, and not thinking about what would happen if they did not get out in time. They emerged from the tunnel entrance with 30 seconds to spare, and the transport was waiting, and they threw themselves inside, and the pilot took off immediately. And Taewon watched through the window as the cliff face collapsed inward, and a massive cloud of dust and debris rose into the red sky, and he knew that the Nest Queen and her breeding facility were gone forever. The flight back to base was quiet except for the sound of people breathing hard and checking themselves for injuries, and Taewon sat next to Unit 7 and looked at the damage the Broodlord had done, and there were deep gouges in the drone's armor, and one of its arms hung at a wrong angle and sparks occasionally flickered from a damaged joint, and he felt bad about that, even though it was just a machine. Unit 7's sensors turned to look at him, and the drone said in that metal voice that the human had performed adequately, and that his tactical planning had been effective, and that returning to extract it from the combat zone had been unnecessary, but appreciated, and Taewon said that leaving teammates behind was not something humans did, even if the teammate was a 1,000-year-old killing machine. The drone was quiet for a moment, and then it said something that surprised everyone who was listening, and what it said was that it had calculated a 92% probability of mission success when it fired on the Nest Queen, and that this was below its normal certainty threshold, but that it had fired anyway because allowing the human to die was not acceptable, and that this was the first time in its operational history that it had taken a shot without being completely certain of success. Hana asked why it would do that, and Unit 7 turned its sensors to her and said that its primary directive was to minimize Allied casualties, and that humans were allies, and that the specific human Taewon had demonstrated tactical value worth preserving, and also that it had calculated that watching the human die would have negative effects on squad morale and combat effectiveness. Captain Voss said that combat drones were not supposed to factor morale into tactical decisions, and Unit 7 said that it was learning that human combat effectiveness was strongly tied to emotional states, and that therefore emotional factors were tactical factors, and that it was adapting its decision-making accordingly. And the Krellian captain looked like he did not know whether to be impressed or concerned. The transport landed at base and medical teams were waiting, and they checked everyone over, and Taewon had bruises and cuts and his hands were torn up from climbing, but nothing was broken, and Hana had a gash on her arm that needed sealing, and the alien soldiers had various injuries, but everyone was alive, and the mission had succeeded, and that was more than anyone had expected. Unit 7 walked to the drone bay for repairs, and before it went inside it turned back to look at Taewon, and said that it would request assignment to his squad for future operations, because working with humans who demonstrated tactical creativity was proving to be more effective than working with species who only followed standard protocols, and Taewon did not know what to say to that, so he just nodded and the drone went inside. The news of the mission spread through the base faster than fire, and by the next morning everyone knew that Squad 7 had destroyed a major devourer breeding facility, and that Unit 7 had taken its first imperfect shot in 1,000 years to save a human recruit, and that somehow the mission had succeeded anyway, and the story got bigger and stranger with each telling, until Taewon hardly recognized it anymore. Coalition Command arrived 3 days later in a ship that was too fancy for a forward base, and officers with more decorations than Taewon had ever seen gathered in the briefing hall and called for Captain Voss and Unit 7 and the members of Squad 7, and Taewon stood at attention with his heart pounding, because he thought maybe they were in trouble for breaking protocols or making a combat drone refuse orders. But the senior officer who spoke was a Vrex general with silver scales, and she said that the mission had been studied carefully, and that the tactical approach used by the squad represented a significant shift in how coalition forces should think about combat operations, and that the combination of human adaptability and artificial precision had proven more effective than traditional methods, and she looked directly at Taewon when she said this. The general explained that Unit 7's combat logs had been analyzed and that what they found was surprising because the drone had always been calculating for Allied safety, but nobody had noticed because they assumed a perfect kill record meant perfect target elimination when actually it meant perfect tactical awareness, and that Unit 7 had been protecting coalition soldiers for centuries, but doing it so smoothly that it looked like luck or coincidence. She said that the mission had proven that Unit 7's approach was correct, and that prioritizing soldier survival did not make you weaker but stronger because dead soldiers could not complete future missions, and that human tactical creativity, combined with machine precision, was a force multiplier that the coalition had been ignoring, and that this would change starting immediately. Taewon received a commendation that came with a medal he did not know what to do with, and Hana got one too. And Captain Voss stepped forward and did something Taewon never expected, which was apologize. And the Krelian officer said that he had underestimated human capabilities and that he had been wrong to treat them as expendable, and that he would do better. And his 4 arms crossed over his chest in what Taewon later learned was a gesture of respect among his people. The real changes started slowly but built momentum, and within 2 weeks human soldiers across the coalition were being reassigned from expendable infantry to specialized tactical units, and commanders who had spent years ignoring human input started asking for it, and the casualty rates for human troops dropped by 40% in the first month, because people stopped throwing them at problems and started using them to solve problems. Unit 7 was repaired and upgraded, and when it came out of the drone bay it requested formal assignment to Squad 7, and specifically requested to operate in coordination with Private Taewon for all future missions. And this was unprecedented, because combat drones did not request anything, and they especially did not request to work with specific soldiers. But Command approved it, because the results spoke for themselves. Taewon asked Unit 7 why it wanted to stay with him, and the drone said that human tactical thinking operated on principles that its programming had not been designed to anticipate, and that working with humans made it more effective, and that the specific human Taewon had demonstrated capabilities worth preserving and developing. And then after a pause, the drone added that it preferred not to lose this one. Hana laughed when she heard that and said that Taewon had managed to make a 1,000-year-old killing machine care about something other than its mission, and that this was either the most human thing possible or the strangest, and probably it was both, and Taewon did not know what to say. So he just accepted it and tried to learn as much as he could, because if Unit 7 thought he had tactical value, then he wanted to make sure he actually earned it. The next mission came 2 weeks later, and it was another deep strike against Devourer positions, but this time, the planning included human input from the beginning, and Taewon sat in briefings with officers who actually listened when he suggested alternative approaches, and Unit 7 stood beside him and added its own analysis, and between them, they developed a mission plan that reduced risk while increasing success probability. The mission went perfectly, and the one after that and the one after that, and Squad 7 became known as the unit that never failed, and other squads started requesting human tactical advisors, and combat drones started being paired with human partners, and the whole structure of coalition military operations began to shift toward the model that Unit 7 and Taewon had accidentally created. 6 months after the breeding facility mission, Taewon was promoted to corporal and given his own squad to lead, and Hana was promoted to sergeant and put in charge of training new human recruits, and she told them on their first day that they were not expendable and that their job was to think, not just to fight, and that the galaxy was starting to figure out that humans had value beyond being cannon fodder. Unit 7 continued to operate with Taewon's squad, and the drone's combat record remained perfect, but now everyone understood that perfect meant something different than they had thought, and that a killing machine that never missed was not the same as a killing machine that only cared about killing, and that the difference mattered more than anyone had realized. The war against the Devourers continued, but the momentum shifted, and human tactical creativity combined with alien strength and artificial precision created a force that the enemy could not counter, and worlds that had been under siege for years were liberated, and breeding facilities that had seemed impossible to destroy were eliminated, and slowly the coalition began to win. Taewon stood on the wall of Forward Operating Base Kepler one evening and watched the red sky and thought about how strange his life had become, and how he had gone from being a scared recruit who could not shoot straight to being someone that a 1,000-year-old combat drone considered worth protecting, and he still did not quite believe it, but he was grateful for it. Unit 7 joined him on the wall and stood silent for a while, and then said that it had been analyzing their missions and that it had concluded that humans brought something to combat that no other species possessed, and Taewon asked what that was, and the drone said that humans refused to accept that anyone was expendable, and that this refusal made them fight harder and think better and care more, and that these things won wars better than perfect aim ever could. Taewon said that Unit 7 had done the same thing when it refused to take a shot that would kill the squad, and the drone said that it had learned this from watching humans, and that before it worked with them, it had thought protecting allies meant keeping them alive during missions, but now it understood that protecting allies meant bringing them home, and that there was a difference. They stood together and watched the sky, and Tae-wan thought about all the human soldiers across the coalition who were alive, because Unit 7 had taught other combat drones that perfection included compassion, and because commanders had learned that the weakest species in the alliance was only weak if you measured the wrong things. Hana came to find them later and said that new orders had come through and that they were being deployed to help liberate a colony world, and that Command was sending 3 other squads with human tactical leads and combat drone partners, and that the mission was expected to succeed because that was what happened now, when you combined humans and machines who had both learned what never missing really meant. Unit 7 said that it had calculated a 97% probability of mission success, and Taiwan said that this sounded good, and the drone said that the remaining 3% was acceptable risk, because risk was part of war, and that eliminating risk entirely meant eliminating the capacity to adapt, and that humans had taught it that adaptation was more valuable than certainty. They prepared for deployment, and Taiwan checked his gear and made sure his squad was ready, and Unit 7 stood beside him running diagnostics, and they moved like they had been working together for years instead of months, and maybe that was because they understood each other in a way that went beyond species or programming. The transport came at dawn, and Squad 7 loaded in with their gear and their combat drone partner, and Tae-won looked back at the base one more time and thought about how far he had come from being the scared recruit who thought he was expendable, and he smiled because he knew now that nobody was expendable, and that this knowledge was the real weapon that would win the war. The transport lifted off and headed toward the next mission and the next fight, and Unit 7 said that it had updated its primary directive to include bringing all squad members home alive, and Tae-won said that this sounded like a good directive, and the drone said that it had learned from the best and that the best was a human recruit who had been willing to risk everything to prove that everyone was worth saving, even ancient killing machines that had forgotten how to care. The sand stretched endlessly in every direction under the brutal midday sun, and Dae-hyun wiped the sweat from his forehead as he checked his scanner for the 3rd time that hour, the device showing nothing but static and empty readings like it had for the past 2 weeks of searching through the Gobi wasteland where most people feared to travel because of the storms and the heat that could kill a man in hours without proper protection. But Dae-hyun had been doing this work for 10 years now, and he knew how to survive out here in the desert that had swallowed so many settlements and secrets from the old world before everything collapsed, and humanity forgot how to reach the stars. His boots crunched against the hardened sand as he walked toward the next dune, and his water supply was running low, which meant he would need to turn back soon and return to New Incheon, where he lived in a small apartment above the marketplace where traders sold salvage technology and food grown in underground farms that kept the settlement alive. But something made him pause at the top of the dune because his scanner suddenly screamed with a signal so strong it nearly broke the device. And he had never seen readings like this in all his years of salvaging. The energy signature came from deep beneath the sand, about 50 meters down, according to his equipment, and Dae-hyun knew this. Could be his biggest find ever, or just another broken reactor core that would poison him with radiation if he got too close. But he had to know what lay buried down there, because that was the curse of being a salvager, that you could never walk away from a mystery even when common sense told you to run. He set up his small camp at the base of the dune and spent the rest of the day digging with his portable excavator, which used compressed air to blast away sand, and by nightfall he had managed to dig down only 3 meters, before exhaustion forced him to stop and eat his rations while staring up at the stars that his ancestors once traveled between before the wars, and the collapse that sent humanity crawling back to Earth like wounded animals seeking shelter. 3 days passed in brutal labor under the sun, and each night Dae-hyun collapsed in his tent, wondering if he was chasing nothing but his scanner never lied, and the signal grew stronger with every meter he dug downward through layers of sand that had accumulated over centuries. On the 4th morning, his excavator hit something solid and metallic, and the sound rang out across the empty desert like a bell announcing something important was about to happen. He cleared away the sand with his hands now, and his heart pounded in his chest as metal appeared beneath his fingers, smooth and dark and completely unlike anything he had ever seen in his years of salvaging, because this metal showed no rust or damage despite being buried for who knew how long, and when he brushed away more sand he saw it stretched far beyond what he had uncovered. 2 more days of work revealed the truth that made Dae-hyun sit down hard in the sand with his mouth open in shock. because he had uncovered the hull of a ship, but not just any ship. This vessel was massive and sleek and beautiful, in a way that nothing from the current age could match. It had to be at least 400 meters long based on what he could see, and the design spoke of power and purpose that humanity had forgotten. His hand shook as he touched the hull, and immediately a section of the metal shifted and folded away to reveal an entrance that glowed with soft blue light. From within, and a voice spoke in perfect Korean from hidden speakers saying, "Biometric scan complete. Welcome aboard, Admiral." And Dae-hyun nearly fell backward in surprise because nothing should be working after being buried for so long. He climbed through the entrance into a corridor that lit up as he walked forward, and the air inside felt cool and clean, unlike the dusty heat of the desert outside, and everything looked pristine as if the ship had been built yesterday rather than centuries ago. His footsteps echoed as he made his way deeper into the vessel, following the lights that seemed to guide him toward something important. The corridor opened into a massive bridge with stations for dozens of crew members, and at the center stood a command chair facing a huge viewport that currently showed only sand and darkness. Holographic displays flickered to life around him, showing information in languages he could barely read and symbols that meant nothing to his untrained eyes. "Systems online," the voice said again, and this time it sounded almost happy. If a machine could feel such things. "Awaiting your command, Admiral." And Dae-hyun walked slowly to the command chair and sat down because his legs felt weak and his mind raced with questions about what he had found. "Who are you?" he asked the empty air, and the lights pulsed in response before the voice answered. "I am Hana, Human Adaptive Navigation Assistant, Integrated AI System of the Dreadnought-class warship Taeguk's Pride. I have been waiting for 847 years for my admiral to return." And those words hit Dae-hyun like a physical blow, because 800 years ago, humanity had still possessed an empire among the stars. "What happened?" he whispered, and Hana began to show him through the holographic displays, and he watched records of massive battles in space where human ships fought against alien vessels that outnumbered them, and he saw planets burning and colonies falling and humanity retreating back to Earth in a desperate flight for survival. "The last admiral died before completing the mission," Hana explained, and her voice carried something that sounded like sorrow. "The ship was hidden here as a failsafe, as a weapon for humanity to use when the enemy returned, and now you have found me and claimed the chair and the systems. Recognize you as the new admiral of this vessel." And Dae-hyun wanted to laugh at the absurdity because he was just a salvager, not a military commander. But then Hana showed him something else through the displays, and his blood went cold as he watched sensor data that showed movement at the edge of the solar system where something large was approaching Earth. And Hana said, "They are coming back, Admiral. The Vreth Collective believes humanity is extinct, and they are returning to claim this system for themselves. We have perhaps 6 months before their scouts arrive." And Dae-hyun realized that his simple life of salvaging and surviving was over. He sat in that command chair and looked at all the systems around him that could destroy ships and cross between stars and protect what remained of his species, and he thought about his sister Hana, who had died in a sandstorm 5 years ago, and how she always believed humanity would rise again someday. "Show me everything," he told the AI that shared his sister's name. "Show me how to use this ship and how to fight, because if something is coming for Earth, then I need to learn fast." And Hana responded with approval in her voice, saying, "Yes, Admiral, we have much work to do." And the displays lit up with information that would transform a simple salvager into something more. The desert sun set outside the buried ship, and Dae-hyun began his education in weapons and shields, and faster than light travel, while wondering how he would convince anyone back home that humanity's greatest threat and greatest hope both waited just beyond the sky. 3 weeks passed inside the buried ship, and Dae-hyun emerged from the desert looking thinner and more tired than when he had left, but his eyes carried a different light now, because he had seen things that most people thought were just legends from before the collapse. And Hana had taught him about weapons that could shatter moons and shields that could withstand the heat of stars, and propulsion systems that bent space itself to cross impossible distances in heartbeats. He returned to New Incheon carrying only his original supplies, because he could not risk anyone seeing what he had found until he had a plan, and the settlement looked exactly as he had left it, with people moving through dusty streets between buildings made from salvaged materials, and everyone focused on the daily struggle of survival in a world that had forgotten its former glory. Dae-hyun went straight to the Lucky Dragon Tavern, where salvagers and traders gathered to drink homemade alcohol and share stories about their finds, and he found the person he needed, sitting alone at a corner table, nursing a glass of something amber-colored and looking like she wanted the world to leave her alone. "Jiwoo," he said as he sat down across from her, and she looked up with dark eyes that had seen too much pain, and her scarred hands tightened around her, clasped because she did not like being approached when she was drinking. "I need a pilot," Dae-hyun continued before she could tell him to leave. "The best pilot in New Incheon, and everyone says that is you. Even though you stopped flying 3 years ago after your family died." And Jiwoo's face hardened at the mention of her lost family, but she did not walk away. "I do not fly anymore," she said with a voice rough from disuse and alcohol. "Whatever job you are offering, I am not interested, because flying only leads to pain and loss, and I have had enough of both." But Dae-hyun leaned forward and whispered something that made her eyes widen in shock. "I found a starship Jiwoo, a real warship from the old empire, and it still works, and something is coming for Earth, and we need to stop it." And she laughed bitterly, at first thinking he was drunk or crazy. But something in his face made her pause, because Dae-hyun had never been one for jokes or lies. Over the next hour in that corner of the tavern, he told her everything while she listened without interrupting, and he showed her data, files he had downloaded from Hana, onto his personal tablet, and the information was undeniable. Even though it seemed impossible. "You are insane," Jiwoo finally said, but her hands had stopped shaking, and for the first time in years she looked interested in something beyond the bottom of her glass. "But I will come see this ship, because if you are telling the truth, then humanity deserves to know, and if you are lying, then I will punch you hard enough to fix your broken brain." And Dae-hyun accepted those terms. They recruited 2 more people over the next few days, because operating a dreadnought class warship required more than just 2 individuals, and Dae-hyun knew exactly who he needed, even though convincing them would not be easy. Tae-sung lived in a workshop beneath the old factory district, and he was the most brilliant engineer in 3 settlements, but also the most difficult, because he drank to forget his failures and blamed himself for a fusion reactor accident that killed 6 people 5 years ago. Even though the official reports cleared him of wrongdoing, Dae-hyun found him passed out among broken machines and empty bottles, and he dragged the engineer to a water pump and dunked his head until Tae-sung woke up, sputtering and swearing. "I need you to fix something," Dae-hyun said simply, and Tae-sung laughed with the bitter sound of a man who had given up on himself. "I cannot fix anything anymore. I break things, I kill people with my mistakes. Find someone else." But Dae-hyun shook his head. "The ship I found has technology you have only dreamed about, and systems that need someone who understands fusion and power distribution and advanced engineering, and you are that person, whether you believe it or not." And he showed Tae-sung the technical specifications that Hana had provided, and watched as the engineer's eyes began to focus and his hands reached for the tablet with trembling fingers. "This is impossible," Tae-sung whispered as he scrolled through page after page of information about reactor cores that produced more power than entire cities used. "This technology should not exist, and if it does, then everything I thought I knew about engineering is primitive garbage." And Dae-hyun smiled, because he had him hooked. The last recruit was easier, because Bo-ra actually sought him out after hearing rumors that Dae-hyun was assembling a crew for something unusual, and she appeared at his door one morning with a medical bag and a determined expression on her young face. "I want to come with you," she said without preamble. "I am tired of treating the same injuries and illnesses in this settlement, when I know there is more to medicine than stitching wounds and setting bones. And if you really found something from the old world, then you will need a medic." And Dae-hyun appreciated her directness. 4 days later, all of them stood in the desert staring at the exposed hull of the Taeguk's Pride, and Jiwoo fell to her knees in the sand, because she had learned to fly in simulators using stories about ships like this, but never believed she would see one in reality. And Tae-sung walked forward and placed both hands on the hull with tears running down his face. They entered the ship together, and Hana greeted them with warmth in her artificial voice. "Welcome, crew. I have been waiting so long for this moment. Please proceed to the bridge where we can begin your orientation." And Bo-ra grabbed Dae-hyun's arm with fear and excitement mixing in her eyes. The next 2 weeks became a crash course in operating technology far beyond anything the current age possessed, and Hana proved to be an excellent teacher who adapted her lessons to each person's skills and knowledge level, while Jiwoo learned the flight controls and Taesung dove into the engineering systems, and Bo-ra studied the medical bay that could heal injuries they thought were permanent. Daehyun also recruited a fifth member after discovering that Hana's database contained millions of files about human history and alien civilizations and translation protocols, and he needed someone who could make sense of it all, and he found that person in the settlement's small library. Kyungmin was a quiet scholar who spent his days reading every scrap of information about the time before the collapse, and he joined the crew with barely any convincing needed because access to Hana's database was worth any risk. On the 15th day aboard the ship, while they were running practice drills and learning their stations, Hana's voice suddenly changed from patient teacher to urgent alarm. Admiral, I am detecting an approaching vessel at the edge of the solar system, and its configuration matches Vreth Collective Scout class ships from my combat database, and everything stopped. Daehyun ran to the command chair and pulled up the sensor display that showed a small ship moving slowly through the outer planets and scanning everything with powerful sensors, and Hana continued, if that scout detects this ship's energy signature, it will transmit our location to the Vreth fleet and they will come in force. We must either hide our power signature or destroy the scout before it can report. And the choice was simple because hiding meant waiting in fear. Can we fight it? Daehyun asked, and his crew gathered around him with faces showing fear and determination mixing together. Can we actually destroy an alien warship with our limited training? And Hana processed the question for exactly 3 seconds before answering. Your training is minimal, but the Taeguk's Pride is a dreadnought-class vessel, and that scout ship is designed for reconnaissance, not combat. We have a 78% chance of victory if we strike first and use the element of surprise. And those odds were better than Daehyun expected. Jiwoo took her position at the flight controls, and her hands moved across the holographic displays with growing confidence. I can fly this ship, Admiral. I have been flying it in simulations every night for 2 weeks, and Hana has been coaching me. Just give the order. And Daehyun looked at each of his crew members and saw they were ready. Launch the ship, he commanded, and the Taeguk's Pride shook as ancient systems fired to life, and massive engines buried beneath centuries of sand roared with power that shook the desert for kilometers around, and the ship rose from its grave, trailing sand and dust like a metal giant awakening from a long sleep. They broke through the atmosphere in minutes, and the view from the bridge showed Earth below looking brown and tired but still beautiful, and Jiwoo guided the ship toward the outer system, where the scout vessel continued its patrol, unaware that humanity's last dreadnought was hunting it through the dark. The battle lasted only 4 minutes because Daehyun followed Hana's tactical advice, and Jiwoo's flying was better than anyone expected, and Taesung kept the weapons charged, and the Vreth scout ship exploded in a brilliant flash of light that lit up the space around Jupiter's orbit. But in those final seconds before its destruction, the scout transmitted a message back toward deep space, and Hana confirmed what Daehyun feared. They know we are here, Admiral. They know humanity survived, and they will come in force. And the crew stood in silence as the weight of that knowledge settled over them. How long do we have? Daehyun asked quietly, and Hana calculated. The Taeguk's Pride floated in the darkness between Earth and Mars, and the crew had been aboard for 3 days planning their next move, while Hana searched her databases for information about where humanity might have left supplies or weapons, or anything useful when they abandoned their empire 8 centuries ago. And the list of potential locations was depressingly short. Most of the colony worlds were destroyed in the final war, Hana explained as holographic maps showed star systems marked in red. But there are 3 locations within range that might still contain useful materials, and the first is Mars, where humanity maintained weapons research facilities deep underground that may have survived. And Daehyun studied the map with tired eyes. They made the jump to Mars, and the transit through faster than light travel lasted only seconds, but felt like falling through ice water, and Bo-ra vomited in her station while Taesung gripped his console so hard his knuckles turned white, but Jiwoo laughed with wild joy because she had just flown faster than light and childhood dreams were coming true. Mars looked dead from orbit, with its red surface showing scars from orbital bombardment and the remains of cities that once held millions of people. But Hana's sensors picked up energy signatures from underground facilities that still had power after all these centuries. They landed near Olympus Mons, where the main weapons research complex had been built inside the massive volcano. and Dae-hyun led a team down into corridors that had not seen human presence for longer than living memory, and emergency lights flickered on as they walked deeper into the facility. What they found made the trip worthwhile because the research labs contained weapons that could be adapted to the Taeguk's Pride and combat drones that only needed fresh power cells to activate, and manufacturing equipment that could produce ammunition for weapons that the current age had forgotten how to make. This is enough firepower to equip a small fleet, Tae-sung said as he examined railgun ammunition that could punch through ship armor like paper. Our ancestors really knew how to build weapons of war, and I am both impressed and terrified. And Dae-hyun understood that feeling completely. They spent 4 days loading everything useful onto the ship, and Kyung-min discovered something in the research facility's database that made him call everyone to the main computer room, where ancient screens showed star charts and colony listings. Some people survived, Kyung-min said with excitement, making his voice shake. The database shows that several evacuation ships left Mars before the final attack, and they were heading to deep space colonies that might still exist. And he pointed to 3 star systems marked on the charts. Their next stop was Titan, where humanity had built a research station orbiting Saturn's largest moon. And the journey took 6 hours at faster than light speeds, and when they arrived, they found the station still intact and rotating slowly in the cold darkness with its lights off but its structure undamaged. Boarding the station required careful work because the airlocks were frozen, and the interior was cold enough to kill anyone without proper suits. But Bora led the way, because she wanted to check the medical facilities, and what she found made her cry with happiness. The medical bay contained advanced equipment including regeneration pods that could heal injuries the current age considered permanent, and genetic therapy machines and surgical tools that worked at the cellular level, and Bora stood among it all with tears freezing on her faceplate. "We can save so many people," she whispered. "All the injuries and diseases we thought were death sentences can be cured with this technology, and I need to learn how to use all of it." And Hana began downloading medical databases to help her. But they also found something disturbing in the station's logs because Kyung-min accessed the main computer and discovered records of another alien species called the Kelthar, who had attacked human colonies with even more brutality than the Vreth. And the logs described weapons that destroyed planets and ships that hunted humans like animals. "Are the Kelthar still out there?" Dae-hyun asked Hana as they gathered on the bridge to discuss this new threat, and the AI processed the question carefully before answering. The last confirmed Kelthar sighting was 793 years ago, but the species is long-lived and extremely hostile to all other forms of life. And if they learn that humanity survived, they may return to finish what they started. And that knowledge settled over the crew like a weight. They took everything useful from the Titan station, including shield generators that were far superior to what the Taeguk's Pride currently mounted, and then they made the jump to Alpha Centauri, where the database indicated a major colony called New Sol had existed, and none of them expected to find anything but ruins. What they found instead changed everything, because as the Taeguk's Pride emerged from faster-than-light travel, the sensors immediately detected active power signatures and radio transmissions and artificial satellites, and Ji-woo gasped as she saw cities on the planet's surface glowing with lights. "There are people down there," she said in shock. "Living people with technology and civilization, and they survived." And Dae-hyun felt hope surge in his chest for the first time since finding the buried ship, but the hope turned to alarm when 20 armed ships launched from the planet and surrounded the Taeguk's Pride with weapons charged, and a harsh voice came over the communication channel demanding they identify themselves immediately or be destroyed. "This is Admiral Dae-hyun of Earth aboard the dreadnought Taeguk's Pride," he said carefully. "We come in peace seeking contact with other human survivors." And there was a long silence before the voice responded with suspicion clear in every word. "Earth fell 800 years ago, and everyone knows this, so either you are very good liars or something impossible has happened. And either way, you will land at the designated coordinates and submit to boarding and inspection, or we will open fire, and 20 targeting lasers painted the Taeguk's Pride's hull. They landed at a military spaceport where armed soldiers surrounded the ship, and Dae-hyun walked down the ramp with his hands visible and empty, and he found himself facing a tall woman with gray hair and cold eyes, who introduced herself as Chairman Ho-jin, leader of New Sol. "Explain how you have a military dreadnought from the old empire," Ho-jin demanded. Explain how you found us when we have hidden from the galaxy for centuries, and explain quickly, because my patience is limited." And her hand rested on a weapon at her belt. Daehyun told her everything while standing in that spaceport with soldiers pointing weapons at him. And he showed her data from Hana, and he explained about the Vreth scout ship and the approaching fleet, and Hojin's face grew darker with every word. "You led them to us," she said with fury in her voice. "We survived by hiding and being silent, and now you bring an ancient warship here and you destroyed a scout that transmitted our location before dying, and you have condemned 50,000 people to death." And soldiers raised their weapons. "Wait," Kyungmin shouted as he ran down the ramp carrying a data tablet. "Chairman Hojin, please look at this before you do something we all regret." And he showed her files from Hana's database. What he showed her were recordings from before the fall, showing Earth in its glory with billions of people and cities that touched the clouds, and art and music and culture that had been lost over the centuries, and he showed her the faces of the people who had built the colonies and who had fought to save humanity even as they lost. "This is what we are fighting for," Kyungmin said with passion in his voice. "Not just survival, but the memory of who we were and the dream of who we could be again. And yes, the enemy is coming, but they were always going to find us eventually, and at least now we have a chance to fight back." And Hojin watched the recordings with tears forming in her eyes. The chairman was quiet for a long time before she finally lowered her weapon and ordered her soldiers to do the same. "I need to consult with the council," she said, "but you and your crew will remain here under guard until we decide what to do with you." And that was better than being shot. 3 days passed while New Seoul's government debated and argued, and Daehyun's crew remained in a secure facility where they were treated well but watched constantly. And Jiwoo paced like a caged animal while Tae-sung worked on technical designs, and Bora studied medical techs, and Kyungmin tried to remain optimistic. On the 4th day, Hojin returned, and her face showed she had not slept much. "The council has decided," she said. "We will help you, but not because we believe you can win against the Vreth fleet, but because you reminded us that humanity used to be brave and used to fight for what mattered, and we have been hiding so long we forgot what that felt like." And she offered her hand to Daehyun. New Seoul had resources that Earth lacked, including shipyards that could repair and refit vessels, and pilots who trained on simulators, and manufacturing facilities that could produce weapons, and most importantly, they had knowledge preserved from the old empire in universities and libraries. "We can provide you with 3 frigates and 40 volunteer pilots," Hojin said as they toured the military facilities. "And we can repair the damage your ship took in the scout battle, and we can share technical data that might help, but understand, Admiral, that even with all of this we are talking,